the best HLTV fantasy player we've had ever. It's Lucy.
Yeah, I trolled with this one. I let my hatred of a 16 playoff bracket consume me. It was a mistake. Let's just move on, completely forget about it, and look forward to PGL Bucharest. So we're back to our best of 3 Swiss format for PGL, which I'm a big fan of for fantasy. It means that you've got a lot of flexibility, but it means you should be picking teams that can win best of 3s. This is where upset teams are a little riskier because you can't just rely on the best of 1 victories. And also, I think what's interesting with this is we're missing a lot of the top teams, which means that, yeah, you're probably looking more at your Mongols, Eternal Fire, G2 FaZe as your grounding teams. And I think that basically anyone from Falcons or below can lose to anyone in that bracket. So there's a lot of craziness here, and I think it opens up a lot of experimental drafts because there's a lot of upset potential. But it also means I think a lot of people are going to gravitate towards Eternal Fire and Mongols in FaZe. So let's take a look at some players and see what we can do. For this event, I think a lot of people are going to be looking towards Eternal Fire and Mongols to kind of ground their draft in because they feel like pretty solid teams here with good pricing. I think G2 are way overpriced except for maybe Hunter. And I think that a player that a lot of people are drafting, it makes a lot of sense, is Madja, 183. He's probably the best player for the price point in any of the top teams because you don't want to really draft Karrigan, and then Mongols don't have anyone sub 199. So Madja feels like a really good budget pick from a top team unless you really want to grab your budget from one of the teams way down the list. Then you just kind of grab whichever EF Mongols players you want. I think the only ones I'd maybe be passing on are Santares, Senzu, and 910. I think they're a little too expensive, and the players that are a bit cheaper are probably better during the group stage. Especially Blitz. I think Blitz is maybe a little underrated. I think Elysian Brokey are also pretty good value. I think Rain, there's some other players around that 200,000 price point that I think maybe get you a little bit better value, but I can still see why he's in a lot of drafts. I think it's a really good time to pick Nico. If he was like 5k less, maybe 10k, but yeah, 225 feels a little too much for him, but I really think this is a good space for Nico to do a lot of work during a group stage. But I think Falcons will have pretty reasonable prices, actually. And I think Magisk is interesting at 194 because there's actually not a lot of players around that price point that are from like the top teams, so to speak. And I still have a fair bit of confidence in Falcons getting through this group stage. I think Liquid, I've got a hot take, and it's such a hot take that I didn't feel like I could post it on Twitter, but I think we might be overrating siuhy a little bit. I think we need to calm down a bit. I don't think he's suddenly going to make Liquid a top 5 team. You know, let's let the kid work, but he's not some miracle worker. I do think this team's going to be better with players in the roles that make more sense, and Twist is going to play really well, but I wouldn't be drafting Liquid here until we've had a chance to see them. I think VP are very interesting. I think the same story with Astralis. Both these teams, I think, especially Astralis, we see some of their losses and we're like, this team stinks. But I think that the dramatic losses that they've had have us overlooking some of their really solid victories. And I think that players like Stown, 200,000 during a group stage, really, really good. Like, I would get him over Rain, for instance. And I think the same can be said about players like Flammes, IC, Fame, all really good prices. I want to say Electronic's good for 184, but he has been hot garbage, basically, since taking over IGLing a VP. He used to be the GOAT. It's just not happening anymore. I've seen him in the top most drafted players. I don't know. That feels very risky. I think Gamer Legion, a lot of people have stock in them. And an event like this, I think, again, this is part of why I think Astralis and VP are interesting, is that the top isn't, it's a very bottom heavy event. Like, there's not a lot of top teams here. So there's a lot of room for some of these underdog teams to get through. And so teams like Gamer Legion, Astralis, VP definitely can make their way through here. But with that said, I would probably be steering clear of players like Rez and PR. I think they're a little too expensive, but Slend, Taliesin, that gives you a lot of value to spend on some of the stronger teams while still having a potential upset from one of these players. I like 3D Max at this event, and I think that they can get through this group stage. Unfortunately, I think their pricing is a little bit restrictive. I think Maka is like another good player though at that 200k price point. You know, you could get him over a Rain, for instance, and I think he could do some work for you, but I'm not quite sure about the rest of their pricing justifying them. Furia have not been good. Yuri, decent price. And I think once we get down to this point, I know Complexity are in Europe and have been doing some okay stuff against some good European teams, so they might surprise here, but I don't see them getting through the groups. Rare Atom definitely won't. Legacy has been doing really good in NA, but again, I don't expect them to get through groups here. Approachy could be interesting. I do think that Jacob is an incredibly exciting kind of young talent that's really impressive, and this team plays Europe Tier 2, so I think if you were going to pick any of these bottom 4 or 5 teams, they're actually probably the one to go because they're very cheap and they play a hell of a lot of CS. But I probably avoid too much down here. I do think Jacob's a cheeky little draft, but yeah, too much risk on this bottom side. I would stick, if you're looking for upsets, around the middle of the pack. So despite my promise not to troll, I'm going to troll just a little bit, but we'll start with safety. We're going to grab Woxic Madja. I think it's the best combo from Eternal Fire in terms of price to performance. They're going to grab Blitz, who again, I think is the best value on Mongols. Doesn't leave me with a lot, especially if I want to double up on any of the kind of top teams here. So I'm going to skip out on FaZe and instead I'm going to look at Falcons. I think that Falcons get slept on a little bit because people just dislike them, and fair enough, but for me, I prefer just to pick the players that I think will get me points. So gonna go Falcons. Might be a little risky, but I think in an event like this, without a strong top end, there's a lot more room for the kind of middle pack teams to get through. I think Falcons beats most of them. So this is my draft. Let me know what you're drafting. Let me know what you think. And as always, good luck.